Meanwhile, back on the podcast, 4 colossal nerds named Saba, Chris, Christina, and Frank have set out to take on a great darkness that has enveloped the world of fandom. With their powers of common sense and the strength to take on even the most butthurt Twitter mobs and insufferable comment section trolls. They fight for truth, objectivity, and nuance in the conversation and debate over fictional made-up shit.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of Meanwhile Back on the Podcast. I'm Frank Maguire, and today's show is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to be joined by Christina, Saba, or Chris. They're otherwise committed, and but I'm lucky enough to have a guest host with me for today's show. I work with this person. We've become friends, and we've actually found a lot of mutual ground in terms of comic books and fandom. And it's my buddy Eran. Eran, what's up, man? Say hello to our listeners.
Hey, everybody. What's up, man?
Yeah, man. Thank you again, man. I really appreciate you joining me for this episode. I know that this particular subject matter is just as near and dear to your heart as it is to mine. So I thought, what a better episode to have you on than this one. Again, man, thank you for joining us.
I know anything to talk about BVS. I don't get the opportunity much, so I'm glad.
That's great, man. That's great. Yeah, I don't find a lot of people have a lot of nice things to say about BVS, but we'll get into the reasons why as we get into this show. I think that you know what, this is there's no better time now to jump in on this point. The Batman v Superman project sadly has 3 different versions of it. If you're not familiar with this particular film, there's 3 different versions of this film. Yeah, not a lot of people have had the opportunity to see what I believe is the most important one, the most polished one, and the most finished one, and the one that is the closest to Zack Snyder's vision that he intended, and that is the extended cut. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is the extended cut of Batman v Superman. And I'm sure, Ron, you share my opinion on this, that the extended cut is obviously the superior version of this particular narrative.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it sucks to have to say that, it sucks to have to specify which one we're talking about, because obviously most movies have the one version, but no, 100%. Obviously, that's the version that should have aired.
Can I ask you a question? Have you ever gotten into a conversation with anybody about this particular movie, and then through further exploration, you find out that they never saw the extended cut? They really only have the theatrical cut or the ultimate cut as a frame of reference?
Yeah, totally. I partly blame the production method and the way they did this, because anyone who's not too motivated to kind of make sure they're up to date on what's what just wouldn't have any way of knowing it. So I think probably the majority of the conversations I've had to find out halfway through that they're talking about the theatrical version. But again, I mostly blame the studio and everyone who kind of put it out there in that way, because I was motivated enough to find it because I saw a lot of brilliance in the theatrical version, and I looked it up online and I ended up finding these things, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's a better version. But anyone who's not gonna do that, they're gonna have a hard time knowing it. And honestly, most of the conversations I've had have been shut down pretty early on because they just were so convinced it just wasn't a good movie. So I'm like, all right, what are you going to do?
Now, have you ever had anybody on your advice go out and seek out the extended cut and come back to you and say, hey, you know what? That was a better movie. Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah, I've had 1 or 2 friends and my sister all kind of go back and watch the extended cut. And they were definitely like, okay, yeah, no, a lot of the scenes that are put into the extended cut are, they kind of complete and make you understand a lot of what's going on. That being said, I do find that it generally breaks up into 2 categories of people. The people who kind of look beyond the fact that it's a comic book movie and look for the symbols and the themes and the things that are actually going on in the movie as if they would, an artistic movie. And the others kind of just watch it for what it is on the surface. And they can't imagine that it's talking about anything more, intellectual or deeper, because they're just seeing it as a comic book movie. So usually they're in 2 camps like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that as well. I think you see that with every, comic book related or comic book adapted film. You see a camp of people who can see it as both a film and both an adaptation. But then you also have a very hard-headed camp of people that can only see it as a comic book film and therefore dismiss it before actually watching it or understanding it or even trying to experience it.
Yeah,
There's this stigma.
Yeah, exactly. Like they just they don't think, like they automatically assume because of everything else they've seen in the comic book world that like no director would make a movie like that when it's a comic book movie. Like it's not totally their fault because they're kind of basing it off of the other comic book movies they watch, and obviously the other ones are much more surface based and like, they're more focused on not being too gritty, and they're kind of limiting themselves by respecting all of these like unspoken rules. But BVS doesn't do that. So like I guess I understand where people are coming from because they've been primed to watch these movies in a certain way. But what Snyder did was try to change that paradigm. And unfortunately, as much as I wish it wasn't the case, it just didn't reach a lot of people on that level.
Yeah, no, I think that's true too. Now, you mentioned the studio a couple times. Now let's talk about the studio's relationship with this film, and also the studio's relationship in a much larger picture with Zack Snyder individually. I don't think a lot of people know this, but it's almost documented that Warner Brothers in some way has interfered with most of Zack Snyder's productions, and especially in the comic book genre. They interfered with Watchmen, they interfered with BVS, they interfered with Justice League. And we're also finding out now that the decision to bring Joss Whedon into the project after Zack Snyder was forced to leave the project due to a family tragedy, the decision to bring Joss Whedon was actually the decision potentially of Geoff Johns. That's the rumor now, is that Geoff Johns was the guy behind bringing in Joss Whedon. And a lot of people feel that maybe Geoff Johns purposely chose Joss Whedon in an effort to derail the project, to kind of send it in a different direction, almost have two different directors with completely two different approaches, with completely two different senses of creativity and storytelling, almost kind of clash. It just seems like Geoff Johns wasn't thinking ahead in the greater chemistry of like how this would actually play out. What's your take on that?
Yeah, but I feel like I don't know too much about the studio dramas of it, but
right.
I definitely feel like a lot of it was a kind of irrational and rushed reaction to the audience.
Yeah.
And their opinions on BVS and Justice League, and their opinions on other movies like Marvel movies, where, scratch that, actually, their opinion on Man of Steel, I think, was the first indicator. And I think it sent the studio into a bit of a panic because Man of Steel, just like Superman and BVS, they're both much more gritty, and they're not dark per se, but they're not representing the Superman that people know, because the movie is trying to build Superman into what the people know, So like he has to start somewhere, and considering the responsibility he has and the power he has, why would he start in a cheerful place? That's not a cheerful position to be in until you finally make that decision, So like that's the problem. And I think on Man of Steel, and I heard this, that a lot of people were like, oh, like it's too gritty, it's too like, it's not happy, blah, blah, blah. So I think they kind of put that mentality into BVS. And when they started to see that BVS was becoming the same kind of movie, they sent somebody in who was like, no, let's make it more cheery. Let's do this, let's do that.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem. Like people have to stop looking at other companies or other production places or movies and thinking like, oh, we should do what they did because they were successful. Yeah. It's a completely different thing. You're comparing apples to oranges. Marvel is more cheery, but they always are. Yep. Even in the comic books, Marvel is often more cheery. So it's stupid to do that. So I think they panicked and they kind of pushed Snyder probably to do it. Snyder probably refused, if I had to guess. And then they sent somebody else in, and then he kind of derailed their whole project. And that's kind of the problem, like Nolan's Batman series was in no way cheerful, but it was extremely popular because they told a story that they believed in, and they didn't let anyone stop them on that, and it worked. So like without interference, I think both Justice League and BVS would have been very different movies. Obviously, BVS is evidenced by the fact that we have 3 different kinds of movies. So clearly, it was different when the vision of Snyder was respected. And it's unfortunate because Snyder is a very, very interesting and brilliant director, and I was actually very happy at least to be able to see his version on BVS. At least it came out in the end. Could have been worse. Could have never seen it. Could have always thought BVS was a bad movie. At least we got to know that it wasn't. Yeah,
and now there's this huge movement within the fandom culture to get the studio to release the Snyder Cut of Justice League. Everybody wants to see it. Exactly. # release the Snyder Cut, right? And there's a lot of people who have gone on record to say that it does exist, that it is almost completely finished, and they've seen it, and that it lives up to all the hype. You know, a lot of people don't know this, but Zack Snyder had a very specific trilogy in mind, a very specific storyline where there was going to be time travel, there was going to be dark side, there was going to be the death, potentially what I've heard, the death of Lois Lane, the emergence of the Green Lantern Corps, Cyborg working with Flash in the future. Like, there was all these different amazing ideas that were kind of permeating within this film, and they kind of got derailed because, as you said, the Man of Steel, the feedback from Man of Steel, the response to Man of Steel kind of really colored the studio's perception of how other projects with similar tone and in similar note, be it Batman v Superman or be Justice League, would end up actually impacting it was some sort of early warning system to show the studio that, these films may not be as successful as they first hoped because of this particular tone or this particular feel, this particular flavor that they were going for. Exactly.
And like, in a big way, they kind of doomed the movie from that moment because, and Justice League from that moment, because again, like you're essentially like being in business. I've always been against copying. It doesn't really get you anywhere, and you're always a step behind because you're copying someone who's actually innovating. So you're never able to catch up. And that's pretty much analogous of the entire DC universe, who are so focused on repeating Marvel's successes that they refuse to make their own. And it always puts them a step behind because they're not Marvel. Like, they're never going to be what Marvel is because that's not who they are. They have to be who they are. And not to mention the fact, a big part of why they're not successful, even when they try to be Marvel, is because we already have a Marvel to watch. Why would I want a second one? We have one. Marvel is there. Like, we have Avengers. We have those movies. There's no need to make a second version. We've already been given it. We're looking for a totally different take because we haven't seen that. So show us what we haven't seen. Don't show us what we've seen. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's just burying yourself. So I think the minute Man of Steel came out and the minute they decided to let those pieces of feedback color their entire vision for the DC universe, that was the day where they doomed the entire project.
Yeah, I think so. I really, after Man of Steel and obviously after BVS, I was really excited about the future of the DCEU because I saw a franchise that was placing a lot of importance on character study, on creating, a deeper, darker, kind of, exploration of humanity and our roles in the universe. And the themes were much deeper and way more layered than what we got with Marvel. And the cinematic style was different. And it had its own DNA. Like, you could kind of see that DC was going to strike its own chord, that it wasn't going to copy the Marvel formulaic approach. It was going to do its own thing. And I was really happy with the direction that they were headed. I had no issues with Superman killing Zod. I had no issues with brooding Superman. I had no issues with anything that happened in BVS. I had no issues with anything that happened in Justice League other than the completely disconnected fucking story and plot as a result of trying to marry Zack Snyder's, lead up to Joss Whedon's finish. You know what I'm saying? So the hopes were high. The hopes were very high. And I really think they were headed in the right direction. And for people making this argument that the Snyderverse is dead, I don't think so, people. If you watch Shazam or you watch Wonder Woman, everything that Zack Snyder's already established for the DC film universe is in those movies. Like, when you watch Shazam, it's the Batman, like Freddy, Billy's foster brother. He's worshiping, the Superman of Henry Cavill. He's worshiping the Batman of Ben Affleck. He's worshiping the Aquaman of Jason Momoa, right? These are all things that were initially created by Zack Snyder. So I'm sorry, guys, but the Zack Snyder verse, the Snyder version of the DC universe is still very present. And Wonder Woman is going to carry that through because Zack Snyder was a part of casting Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, right? So like, I don't know why people can just dismiss just because of, that they've taken some sort of different shift in tone, that it's not still this darker DC universe. Yeah, you know what? It may have got a little bit more lighthearted, but Shazam was kind of dark too, though, dude. Like, they had the 7 deadly sins, and those monsters were eating people in a boardroom. Like, I don't know why everybody thinks we've shifted away, because I don't think we have, but I don't know. What's your take on that? Well, Ron, do you see any radical shift in the DC universe? Because I haven't seen it yet.
I definitely think that, like you said, I think the movies are much more lighthearted, at the expense of depth. Like, if you were to watch BVS and Shazam side by side, obviously they're going to be very different movies. The color tones, the color palette of the movie is much brighter. And even Superman's suit at the end is even brighter than it is in the BVS movies or in the Justice League movie. That being said, Justice League probably brightened it up a bit when they released that final cut anyway. But I'd say that they're probably halfway through. Snyder's DNA is still in there. And I think the reason why it is because they're not capable of designing what he did. So they have no choice but to keep some of that DNA in there.
Excellent
point. So that's
point.
the thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, I just don't think they have his vision. And while people may not appreciate the movies on the surface, what he established was obviously strong enough that a studio who didn't respect his vision is still carrying on the roots of his vision.
I agree.
Like, clearly it's there. Clearly he had an impact on everyone to the point where they don't even notice it. I think that's still there. I think the thing that's missing is the depth. I don't think there's any more, deeper themes or, anything like that kind of tries to. Also, I think the biggest difference of all is when in BVS, not even Justice League, I don't even think that when they release the other cut, it'll be that way, because Justice League isn't the same character study that BVS is. But right. In BVS, his goal is essentially to take these comic book characters, make them look like they do in the comic books with obviously some altercations. But I think that's the big purpose of the Batman suit in BVS and in Justice League, is using a suit that you would always see in comics and that you probably wouldn't expect to make it to the big screen, and just dropping these people in the real world and sort of forcing the real world to react to these larger than life characters, these people who you don't expect to be in this world. And you don't expect that because he's not adapting them. He's essentially an antithesis to the Nolan series, where Nolan forces Batman to adapt to the real world, but Snyder forces the real world to adapt to Batman and Superman.
Great point.
So
yep.
That's the one thing, in my opinion, that's been taken away. And again, the main reason it's been taken away is because that's a capability Snyder possesses that whoever they're bringing in now does not possess the same way. And that's the only thing, obviously being a character study fan myself, that's the thing I personally miss and I wish were there. But that's sort of the difference. Like, I don't think adding humor or subtracting humor is the be all end all of any movie. Just because I see humor in Wonder Woman doesn't mean I'm not going to like the movie.
Right.
It's more the fact that Wonder Woman was definitely the closest thing to a character study since BVS, but BVS was like an extremely intense character study and really tried to take that, here are comic book characters. Now let's see what the world's ready to do with those characters. And that's the big difference. Like, in all the other ones, the world, it's almost taken for granted. That question isn't asked. The question isn't asked, like, what will the world do if these people were dropped into it and all of a sudden we find out these people exist? Like, that's not a question.
So true.
Let's say in Shazam. You know what
so
I mean?
True.
But in BVS, it's the guiding question of the entire movie.
So
and
true.
Even in all the news, all those scenes where there are people on the news pundits that are talking about it.
Yep.
They're essentially framing the entire movie.
Yep.
They're essentially the narrators of the movie and framing it. But again, you don't have that in the other movies. So
yep.
Is Snyder still there? He's 100% still there. I don't think they're capable of not having him there. But because he's not physically directing it, that sort of Snyder characteristic is, of course, not there.
Yeah, you know what?
To me, it's sad.
Yeah, no, you make some great points about the overall, the grander existential impact that the existence of these characters has on the existing or on this manufactured universe, right? You know, the Metropolis and the Gotham of this DC universe. Up until this point, you know, I think that the continuity dictates that really, well, this is probably going to get more muddied as we get into Wonder Woman 84, because that's a prequel. Is it? No, well, it's a prequel to Justice League, but it's a sequel to the original Wonder Woman film. But it gets muddy because up until this point, the only cape and cowl that they knew was a vigilante. They didn't understand him to have any sort of supernatural abilities. Like, he definitely became an urban legend for criminals. The criminals definitely saw him as someone with superhuman abilities, but I don't think that the people ever saw him as somebody other than somebody who had the bravery to go out and to fight crime and to be a symbol of justice and you know, to go out there and to keep the streets safe. But there's no demonstration of any sort of superpowers at this point within this universe until Superman emerges on the scene. Then they're like, holy fuck, who is this guy? Like, he can fly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like, that's something that I feel like when Snyder made I'm not sure whose decision it was to make BVS, like have Batman join in on a Superman movie. I don't think it was Snyder's idea, but what I do like is Snyder looked at it and he pinpointed the main dynamic between the two, which is just like you said, Batman is a known threat and a known phenomenon. And it's nothing insane because he's not a god or anything like that.
Yeah.
So Snyder works really hard in BVS to introduce that godlike figure and to establish a difference between those two characters, saying that, yes, like, it's been 20 years. The world knows about these vigilante type heroes, so to speak, but no one has ever known about a godlike being like Superman. And the whole movie is really centered around the world dealing with finding out about that.
Definitely. And
you know, different sets.
Yeah. You know, and like, I really want you to hold that thought, because when we get into the theme, like discussing the themes of this film, I really want to dive more into that. But let's start kind of back at the beginning, because my hope is with this episode is we can get some people to find reason to go back and, you know, jump on the internet and try and find an extended cut of this film and actually look at it, and to try and watch it with some of the things that we've said in this particular episode in the back of their head, like, oh, you know what, like maybe this film does deserve a watch. Maybe this extended cut really is, you know, night and day difference between the other cuts. Because I really feel like it is. I really feel like the extended cut is one of the best examples of comic book filmmaking out there. And it's a shame that this isn't more public knowledge, because this is what Zack Snyder is always going to be remembered for when people mention BVS, is that they're going to be like, oh yeah, no, that movie sucks shit. Like, I went and saw it in the theater and it was horrible, and there was these giant plot holes, and the story made no fucking sense, and what was with the desert, and what was with the guy in the wheelchair, and blah 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 blah, you know. And you really have to watch the extended cut to really get an understanding as to the genius of the story, the plot structure, and especially Lex Luthor's bigger, larger plan at play, like how he kind of put all these little moving pieces into their places to get him to the finish line of his, whatever his end goal was. It's quite a masterful performance in terms of his intellectual superiority. So before we jump into all that, let's start at the beginning. What did you like about this film? What were the big standout points? What were your big takeaways?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I think the biggest thing was the character study aspect of the movie. Up until this movie, up until the Man of Steel, so up until this universe, you don't really, for Superman, you don't get a character study, really. Everyone who's tried to film a Superman movie, be it the more known ones or the more ghetto ones that never really made it out, no one really establishes that. They always just start with Superman being Superman and having this sort of like happy-go-lucky attitude. But again, what Snyder asks that I would ask, which is why I liked it, is that why would he have that attitude? Why would he start that way? It doesn't really make a ton of sense. What you have is a guy with unlimited power and a world that's too weak for that power, and like literally physically too weak. Like, he has to walk around being careful about everything. He can't shake someone's hand without paying attention about how hard he's doing it. So like, this is a guy that can literally take down the world, and he has to find his place in it. And he has to make a huge decision that Batman will never understand, because he'll never have to make that choice, which is, does he want to sacrifice himself to be for the people, to be a monument to them, and to be everything that they hope him to be? And that's something that very few superheroes in the DC universe will ever understand. They'll never get that question. So why would you not be extremely apprehensive about being that hero? And why would you not have like a lot of trouble figuring that out? And what I like about BVS is they push that envelope by adding a ton of criticism, also positive feedback by some pundits and regular people, but mostly it's criticism and questioning about why he's here. And it just shows the distrust of humanity. It shows the dark sides of humanity. And he's shown that pretty much all the time. And that's why it keeps going back to him watching those clips and like seeing them, and like you see his reaction, because those are important pieces of the movie. They're not like sugarcoating for the movie. Those are important things, because that's essentially showing, it's basically turning humanity's mirror to Superman and being like, so this is what we actually look like all the way through. Are you sure you want to protect us? And Superman has to make that choice. And that's a shitty and hard choice to make. And that's what I like about the movie in terms of showing that character study of Superman, which no one's ever shown. And then rather than showing a full character study of Batman, because that we have seen in the Nolan trilogy, they actually more, obviously this is a Superman movie, right? So like at the end of the day, Batman is the second chair. So like Batman's character study is more a reaction to the Superman. So like, how would a character like Batman take the existence of a being like that? Like, how would he see it? They do a great job of sort of creating the circumstances around Batman that influence Batman's decisions and his judgments on Superman. And they do an even better job of exposing the fact that Batman has a trigger that highly emotionally motivates him into negative judgment, which is, basically the destruction of things he cares about in front of his eyes. And that's what sets Batman off, and it turns him. And Alfred actually makes a speech, funny enough, in the movie at the beginning when he goes into the Batcave, and Alfred essentially says that the presence of beings like that can turn good men cruel. And that's him essentially putting a mirror on Bruce, being like, he's triggered you. This is exactly what you're vulnerable to, and this is exactly who you could become if you're not careful. And you obviously watch him evolve into that, only to pull away, at the right time before he crosses that line. So that's really what I really enjoyed about the movie, and it's the thing that they brought to the table that other comic book movies never brought. So they had me just right there. They had me in.
Well, you made a great analysis of the character study of this film. That's definitely something I really like about this movie too. The other things I like about this film are obviously this opportunity to bring the Trinity together in this amazing cinematic, action-driven, just visual masterpiece. Like the visual storytelling in this film is just beautiful. The cinematography is amazing. The other things that really stand out to me is Lex Luthor. The role of Lex Luthor and the role that he played in this story was just brilliant. I like Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. I really loved Ben Affleck as Batman, as an older, more seasoned, more grizzled Bruce Wayne. Definitely touching on things from The Dark Knight Returns. I definitely saw a lot of that in the Bruce Wayne character. And just some of the sequence design in terms of the actual stunts that were done were fucking phenomenal. I love the interplay of these different contrasting themes and visual language. Like the whole, granted in the DC universe within the comic books, Metropolis and Gotham aren't across the harbor from each other. They're actually quite farther apart. It touched on some very contrasting ideas. Gotham was a city of darkness and despair, and then you look over at Metropolis and it's bright and sunny and it's beautiful and everybody's attractive. So it was really cool to kind of have those two things polarized. Also the score of this film is fantastic. The way that they used music to evoke emotion, the way that they used music to suck you in and to connect you to these characters, masterfully done. And just the overall, like I said, I'm a big fan of this darker tone, like these deeper these deeper cuts into the layers of humanity. I'm not like, I like Marvel and I enjoy the Marvel films, but DC has always kind of been my place where I go when I need something a little bit, more inside the gray area between the black and the white, That's kind of where I go to get this stuff. And I've always been able to get it, especially from Snyder. Snyder's always very good at giving you, the moral complexity of the gray area. And I love that about his films. And that's definitely present within Batman v Superman. And all the performances are fantastic. The special effects are great. And the story, once you see it from the extended cut point of view, I think is one of the better structured stories I've particularly seen. And as a fan of the evil genius and his masterful plot with the intricacy and the complexity, Lex Luthor's plan was fucking genius with a capital G. It was so well planned. So beyond what we liked about this film, what didn't you like about this particular film? Because I know I have some issues with it.
So there's no real getting around the fact that they tried to pile on a lot of stuff into one movie. You can't really get away from that. Obviously, it wasn't super necessary from a plot standpoint, but of course, the studio had their own goals. And again, it was part of the problem that they felt the need to rush this sort of thing instead of just paving their own road. But, what can you do? The other thing, I wouldn't say it's a problem, but I'll say I could have easily done without, was the fact that they introduced Wonder Woman and the three of them in this particular movie. I didn't really need that. I mean, in my opinion, they had so much material without that. Even without the Doomsday fight, they could have waited for the next movie for that. They just had so much material, and like the character study was so good. Like by the time Wonder Woman made her entrance, in my head, I was like, so awesome to see her, and even cooler to see Doomsday. But I was done 10 minutes ago. Like I was fulfilled, like I got what I wanted out of the movie. So, like I said, it's not a bad thing. I was happy to see it. And considering this whole universe didn't really work out, I guess it was a blessing in disguise. But at the same time, from the standpoint that Snyder really took, which was, the depth and the character study and all these things in the movie, I don't think he needed that. I would have probably assumed he didn't personally want that in the same movie. He probably wanted to, have a sequel for that.
Okay. Yeah. I you know what? I wouldn't have been mad about them doing a two-parter. I really wouldn't have. No, I definitely wouldn't have been mad. So the one thing that stood out to me as far as an issue with the film was the lack of exposition in terms of the past of some of these particular characters. One, obviously, I think is Batman, Bruce Wayne, where we're introduced to him in a universe where he stopped fighting crime for quite a long period of time. He's kind of hung up the cowl, and this advent of Superman is what brings him back into the mix, and he's trying to satisfy his anger and his rage by going out into the streets and punishing people who can't, they can't, like, he's not going to go fight Superman because Superman's going to kick the shit out of him, but he can go fight, criminals in the streets and get his rage out that way. Right. And he's medicating and he's drinking. So there's not really a lot of backstory other than the things that we can kind of assume about why he is the way that he is. And I would have loved to see more of something tangible. And I'll use an example here. Do you remember in the film Logan? Yeah. The kids had their X-Men comic books, and you can actually see Wolverine in costume on the cover and whatever.
Totally.
Like, why wasn't there something with Batman attached to that? You know what I mean? Like, so it would have been cool if Batman's legend had kind of transcended and ended up in popular culture, right? That would have been cool to see, because that would have given me something to say, okay, you know what? Like, he did a lot of good. There could have been more backstory to that character for sure. The other thing I took issue with was the Martha scene. Like, granted, there's a lot more depth and a lot more complexity to the Martha scene than people take at face value. There's a lot more to it than people will assume as soon as they've seen it. But I think if they had thought it out, like if Chris Terrio and Zack Snyder had gotten together and said, hey guys, listen, if we do this in the theater, people aren't going to be able to put this thing together right away. It's going to probably be something that people kind of, chide and make fun of the moment it happens, right? They're going to laugh. These two guys have mothers with the same name. We get that. But is this really the point of reconnection for these two characters is going to be the fact that their mothers share the same name. And you have to dig deeper. Like you have to look at it from the point of view of this is where Batman reconnects with his own humanity, because he realizes that Superman isn't just this force from another planet. He's not just this omnipotent demigod. He's somewhat human because he has a mother, right? He has a family. He has some humanity to him. And I think he starts to see Superman in that moment as actually more human than he sees himself, because Bruce Wayne doesn't really have the life of a human. He has the life of a vigilante, like, and we'll get into that, because I think that's something that you probably want to talk about a little bit furthermore, because there's a lot of telltale signs of these things. So I had problems with the Martha scene. Yeah, and the other thing that really stood out to me was Doomsday. Like, I really didn't like this representation of Doomsday. I liked him in the comic book. I think that in the comic book, the slow reveal of his ripping costume, that spacesuit he was wearing when he came down on that asteroid or whatever it was, the slow reveal of these little small characteristics, these little physicalities were actually, they built up. They created a little bit of suspense as the fight wore on. But when he emerges as this gray thing from this like cocoon thing within the scout ship, he doesn't really look all that menacing. Like, I would have had him with more of the spines and the spikes and whatever you want to characterize them as. But like, he looked a little bit more, like, I think he would have been a lot more threatening if they had him more comic accurate. I think it would have been a lot better. That's my take on the Doomsday scene. And honestly, I think it would have been cooler if it wasn't Doomsday being grown from Zod's kind of Frankenstein corpse. I think that was a cool aspect of the story, but I think that the asteroid aspect would have worked too. And I think it would have caught everybody off guard. Like, you just have this asteroid coming in from, the darker depths of space, and boom, it hits the planet and out crawls this creature. That could have been cool too. But I think at that point, they probably would have had to bring in more Justice League members, and the Justice League wasn't even formed yet. So I want to talk about the commentary too. I want to talk about the commentary, and I want to talk about the themes of this movie. I think a large part of the commentary is this idea of fear of the other. And I think we already touched on this a little bit, because you were talking about Superman being this, coming to a world that is strange to him and trying to find his identity in a place where he knows he's an alien. He knows he's not one of these people. Like, and we definitely see the world reacting to it in a multitude of different ways. We see intellectuals looking for more of an existential explanation or question to kind of be pondered. And then we have humanity. We have human beings basically pushing back against this thing. We see that demonstration outside the Capitol building where there's people with like, go home aliens, no aliens. It's very clearly humanity is acting on fear, where the more enlightened people are more reacting in terms of intellectual curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. No, it's that's the thing about the movie, is that they show a lot of points of view, as they should, because it's like the biggest event in the history of the world, right? So I mean, like, there's got to be a lot of controversy, there's got to be a lot of conversation around it, and like I mentioned, the conversation really is the narration of the whole movie.
I think we see a lot of commentary about immigration, and I think given Zack Snyder's personal life, where he has adopted a few different kids from different backgrounds and different races, I think that maybe the immigration question is something that's probably very near and dear to him. And he uses Superman as this tool to kind of examine what immigration is like within North America, like what it's in, what it's like in the United States. Would you say that that kind of bled through for you too?
Oh yeah, totally. And if you look back to the other Superman movies and even some of the comics, even if they weren't well done, immigration is always a pretty big part of the conversation, because that's obviously what he is, an immigrant to the planet. And the reactions he faces are the same reactions that a lot of immigrants from other countries face when they're migrating to a new place. So yeah, I think that's always been a pretty vital part of Superman canon. I've seen it in a few graphic novels. I've watched it, and even the Christopher Reeve movies and stuff had it. But yeah, no, that's a very interesting part of it for sure.
You saw the immigration commentary in the Christopher Reeves movies?
Yeah, I think the first one especially, they saw that.
Could you point to a specific part? Because I'm just drawing a blank.
I think he actually, there's a few parts where he literally says it, like he says that, I don't think he used the word immigrant per se, but he actually says that he's, a visitor from another place, and that like he's trying to find his place in the world, and that he thinks it's his home. Even his, the way he speaks is how an immigrant would speak, like he talks about a new home and how even if it's not where he's from, it's his home now and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no, like his home is very much. You know what? You make a great point. I never made this connection before. But Lois Lane has always kind of referred to him as Smallville before they fell in love with each other, right? Like he was Smallville. So it was almost like the small town becomes his identity. But in a way, Krypton is his identity too, but not known to other people. So it's almost like he's casted in two different lights. He's casted as being a small town immigrant, and then also small town immigrant in a big city, and then, being an alien on another planet as well.
Exactly. And even his identity of Clark Kent, once he's in the big city in Metropolis, it's the same thing. He tries to model himself after the residents there because, he wants to feel like this is his home. And at the end of the day, that's really all he's looking for is, like for him to belong to this home, and that's what his parents give him, and that's what his friends give him. Yep. And he's always desperate to have that because, isn't every immigrant, right? That's kind of the whole dream.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably very, very true. There's that part where he's talking about his mission, and he's trying to explain it as like the vision of a small town farmer, right? That his dad. This is what his dad wanted for him, right? This is where the pressure is coming from, is that his dad had this expectation of him to be this shining beacon, this beacon of hope to the world, right? And he feels that pressure, and he does, like, you actually hear him say, like, this is the vision of a small town farmer. And I think that this kind of hope is more identifiable with somebody in a small town than a giant metropolis. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, no, exactly. I totally agree. I think it's sort of his whole motivation, but they've definitely showed it more in BVS than they ever have. I mean, and Man of Steel more than they have in anything else. It's just much more of a prevalent message.
So other than the fear of the other, the outsider, the immigration kind of idea, some of the other things I saw were, obviously there's a lot of bureaucracy in BVS, a lot of bureaucracy where the government is interfering with Lex Luthor, and the government wants to question Superman, and the government is contemplating finding some way to kind of control Superman in his actions and to govern him and to let him, like, to tell him where he should go and like who he should save and, when he can intervene and when he can't. We see that on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, and it's funny too, if you go back to as big of a piece of garbage as it was, if you go back to the I think fourth Superman movie with Christopher Reeves, it's sort of the same question with nuclear arms, where there's this huge conversation of does he belong in a position to be able to participate and control a situation like that? Basically to intervene in these state level affairs, which is exactly what they say in BVS as well.
So one of the other themes that I think pushes through in this film is there's a lot of visual language that touches back on what we experienced on 9/11, especially the destruction of Metropolis. It takes on this very 9/11-esque kind of look and feel, wouldn't you say?
He has a way, Snyder, of really depicting these things and comparing them to real events that have happened. You see it a lot, and you see a few different themes that he's come across in the movie. And I definitely noticed that 9/11 was a pretty prevalent theme for sure.
It's pretty aggressive too. Like, the buildings coming down, that giant smoke cloud that Bruce is running through. Like, I literally saw that on the news the day that 9/11 happened. Like, you'd see people emerging from these giant dust clouds, just covered head to toe in, debris from buildings and dust from all over. And, so I think that was pretty on the nose. Maybe it's Snyder even exercising some of his own trauma with the event. I don't know, but it was very strong. It came through very, very heavily, if you ask me. That's kind of what I picked up from that.
Well, there is a productional benefit to doing it too. Obviously 9/11 is a delicate subject, so I don't think he ever could have made it like way too obvious, because
Yeah.
a lot of people would have complained. But he made it obvious enough to see the distinction. And what I like is it's the same thing that X-Men often does in their new series, which is that they establish real world events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they plop these unreal characters into it. So it's like we're watching a repeat of something that actually occurred, but you're putting in these, characters that don't exist, that have these powers, that
Right.
basically ask the questions: if these people existed, what would these events have been like? So it's kind of a touch on that. And you see that a lot, but pretty much the whole X-Men, the new series, is pretty much focused on that.
Yeah, no, I think that, I definitely think that he does try to touch on more real, more tangible things to kind of help the real world building that he's trying to create. Like he's trying to put, he's not like, like you said at the top of the show, I think you were talking about the contrast between putting superheroes in the real world or putting the real world into the world of the superheroes. And I think that's exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to add these subconscious kind of cues so people can kind of reconnect these heroes to a more real world, right? Instead of just looking at them as like, comic book character studies, they're looking at them as like, this is what Batman would really be in the real world. This is what Superman would be in the real world. This is how the real world would react if we ever heard of a Superman. This is how the real world would react if we had a Batman. This is what Batman would be like in the real world, right? I think that that's something that he definitely touches on. Obviously, okay, so let's dip a little bit more into the character studies too, because I think one of the most interesting things, obviously, I think one of the strongest points of feedback on this film is what Zack Snyder did with the Batman character in terms of him using a gun, him killing people. And it's not just the nightmare scene. Like, people had a problem with Batman having a gun in that final scene when he rescues Martha, blah, 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 blah. And then obviously the response that people had to this version of Superman as well. It just seems that the realer that Zack Snyder tried to make these characters, the more layered, the more dimensional, the more pushback he got from fans. Is that because people don't want the image of their heroes tarnished, or is it because they fail to see that the genius in terms of the dimensional construction of these particular characters? Which one do you think that is?
I think it's a balance of the two. I think a lot of people are automatically expecting to see what's in the comics. I don't think they actually could, a lot of them could pinpoint why they want to see it that way. They kind of just have this automatic stance. And a lot of people at the same time don't want to have an analytical view of a movie like this. Like, they're not interested in having a character study or to try to figure out, what's trying to be done in the movie or what it's trying to accomplish. I don't think they're interested a lot of the time in that. What Marvel does is it gives you sort of like it gives you the storyline on a platter, and the themes are easily established, and it's very effortless to watch a movie like that. As good as they are, they don't require the same intellectual effort. So I think a lot of people are just not interested in that. I'm not going to say they're stupid. They may not be. They just may not be looking to have that conversation in a movie like this. This might be their getaway movie. Who knows? But I think it's probably a balance of those factors where, it just may not be the place for it, but it's still a foolish sentiment to have, because a lot of people like me, like you, are interested in these questions being asked and are interested in an alternative of these characters. And in terms of Batman, I almost think it was necessary to have him be like this, because Superman, he's on the journey at the beginning of his career to figure out if he wants to defend humanity, even when humanity could be ugly. And Batman is on the opposite end of his career, near the end, trying to figure out, like in his mind, humanity doesn't deserve the Batman that they used to have. Like, they don't deserve such purity because of everything he's seen, which he even says to Alfred, he's like, 20 years, what has that gotten us? Like all that. He has this embittered attitude toward
he's defeated
everyone, really. Yeah, exactly. He's defeated. So I think for this to work, for this movie to have worked, I think you need both of them in these particular places asking themselves these particular questions so that they could both turn a corner. But if you're looking at this movie, what's your alternative exactly? Do you want Batman to be as he always is, and so that he could turn the corner into being embittered and hating humanity? Or do you want him to start that way and turn the corner into the Batman you know? It's a weird thing to oppose, because you're getting the Batman you want anyway. You're just getting a journey to get back there again. But it's 20 years. The guy's an older guy. Why would he not have a different outlook after so many years of fighting a fight that never stops? So like,
yes,
it's just a weird thing to have a problem with, because it's unrealistic. It's obviously a weird thing to say in comic book universe, but it's unrealistic to think that like he's just going to fight crime for 25 years and not change a hair, you know? Like, they both have decisions and figuring out to do, and they're both on opposite ends of the spectrum, and that's what makes the movie interesting. If they were both in the same place, like, there's no conflict, there's nothing. Why watch it?
I don't like seeing I don't like reading comic books where all the hero does is throw the bad guy in jail or in some sort of, superhero prison just so they can escape and kill more people. Like, I like it when there's a sense of finality to the story, or when the hero recognizes that this is just an immovable object and I'm going to have to do whatever is necessary to prevent any more bloodshed, any more harm coming to any more people. I need to do what's necessary. Those are the stories that I gravitate towards. That's why I loved Man of Steel, because Clark Kent or Superman knew that he had to kill Zod. Zod basically goaded him into it. He's like, I'm never going to stop. He's like, I'm never going to stop coming after you. I'm never going to stop trying to bring Krypton back. He basically gave him no choice. And I think Michael Shannon was just interviewed this past week and said the exact same thing. He understands why Superman killed Zod at the end, because he had no other choice. He wasn't going to stop coming at him. So
no,
when you get to...
also, people are focusing on the wrong thing, because what you have to focus on in that scene is Superman's reaction to it, not his
exactly
action.
He was absolutely destroyed by having to kill somebody. It wasn't like he just killed Zod and then flew off and he was okay. This definitely had a deeper, more seated impact on him than people realize. Like, he's forever changed by that particular action. And I don't think he thought that he was going to, that this whole Kryptonian invasion of Earth was going to resolve itself without somebody dying. Like, I think he kind of knew what he was getting into, and people don't really understand that. They kind of just want to look on things at the surface and go, you made my hero kill somebody. Now I don't like my hero as much. Well, dude. And, I think Zack Snyder said it best. He's like, how do you think that they're going to be able to battle or to fight with these kinds of people and not have somebody die?
Yeah. And like, clearly, even with what like Zod says, like, clearly Snyder's purpose was to make this. He wasn't like trying to come up with the best reaction in a scene that was already made. He made this scene for this. And at the end, like, Superman, basically his reaction was so harsh because he was basically in his head, he's thinking, this is an asterisk on my character and it's always going to be there. And like, it's something I didn't want, but I had to do. So like, now it's set. Like, this is something that I'll always remember, and that like something I shouldn't have done. So like, that's the whole point, is that that's how Superman deals with things like that. And there's a contrast between how he deals with it and how Batman deals with it in BVS, where he doesn't really, shed a tear or think about it more than once. He's kind of just like, well, that's just what it is. Like, this is what has to be done. And like, his mentality, like Batman's mentality on Superman, goes so far the opposite way, where, like he says, if there's a 1% chance that he might be a danger, that's enough to kill him. Like, that's not how Superman thinks. Superman thinks if it's 100% danger, then I have to kill him. And like, just like Zod said, I'm 100% going to do this no matter what you do. I'm not going to stop. So like, that's the motivation Superman needs. If you tell him that it's 100% that like this is going to turn out this way and it's going to be in danger, will he do that? And he'll hate himself for it. But Batman, he only needs 1%. He needs 99% less.
Yeah, he's not good. Yeah, the Batman's not going to take the chance, especially because he's dealing with a being that is literally the equivalent of like a nuclear bomb. Like, he has that tremendous amount of power at his disposal. So he sees it, like, he literally looks at it through the lens of like a nuclear threat. Like, if it's there's a 1% chance, I have to act preemptively. I have to I can't give them the opportunity to strike first. I have to strike first.
Yeah, no, exactly. He's establishing the same existential calculus that, they used in the Cold War. And he kind of asked the question, like, imagine they actually, one of them pulled the trigger, like that's what Batman is kind of doing in effect, is he's like, I'm going to shoot my bomb first.
Yep. No, for sure. Did we talk about Batman as a character study yet? Did we get into that?
Yeah, well, basically, at the beginning, what I was mentioning is that he's sort of an ancillary character. He's not, like, the character study is as deep in as it should be with Batman, because at the end of the day, it is a Superman movie. And, Batman is the sort of assistant character to that. So, like, the movie is really focused on studying Superman, and Batman is adding depth to that. So you definitely get a study of Batman, but of course it's not as in depth as it is with Superman, because Superman had a previous movie to establish it. And again, like, Batman's really just adding to the challenges of Superman, and they established just enough of Batman's character for you to understand why he's going after Superman.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, I think you can make the argument we don't even see the real Bruce Wayne, real Batman, until he kind of has that moment of clarity, that epiphany. Like, would you say that? Because I feel that way. The earlier scenes with Batman, the only real kind of Batman feel I got, or Bruce Wayne feel I got, was when he's liberating the women in the prison from the sex trafficker, the human trafficker. Like that first reveal shot of him clutching to the roof and the wall, and you see him scamper across the roof as the cops are shooting at him. That was fucking phenomenal. That was one of the coolest fucking scenes I've ever seen. And the way that he kind of like just kind of shoots up through the fucking the hole in the roof and escapes was just awesome.
Yeah, it's probably one of the best like physical interpretations of Batman, from the costume all the way up to his strategy and his moves and, throwing his devices and stuff like that. It's definitely the most accurate representation. All the other ones, while some of them have been good, like the Nolan trilogy, they didn't match it up exactly like that. Like, that's very, reminiscent of comic books and the animated series and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so what do we think of Lex Luthor? Lex Luthor was one of my favorite characters in this entire movie. I don't know about you, but I love Lex Luthor. Go ahead.
Yeah, like, the only thing that shook me is, like, the fact that he was, like, younger. There's no reason for that to matter, but for some reason it matters. Like, it's almost the same irrational idea as people not liking that, Batman kills, or that Superman is, like, more gritty. It's just something I've seen in the comics so much, in the animated series, that it's like you almost expect it to be that way. But if I take away that irrational thought, it's definitely a great representation. I didn't like his, like, little nicks and, like, yammering sounds and stuff like that, but other than that, I liked him a lot. I thought he was very like, he was a good representation. The way he spoke, like, his strategy, his plans. Like, he's clearly superior intellectually to Batman and Superman. Like, that part I really like. They caught that right on the head.
Yeah, and I think the Lex Luthor character was another device of Zack Snyder's to kind of root this story in realer settings. Like, he basically gave us somebody would almost look like a hybrid of Lex Luthor and Mark Zuckerberg, like the evil genius version of Mark Zuckerberg. You see his office, there's a basketball court in it. It's got this giant illuminated crazy sign. And it's very much looks like kind of like the world of, like, Silicon Valley, that comedy series on HBO, or like just some, scene from, like, a movie about startups. Like, it literally looks like the world of, like, a startup or, like, a tech conglomerate, like, it looks like one of those it is the
office
cultures.
World. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's an office culture.
World. So yeah, that's what Lex Luthor would look like if he was, around now. Exactly. So that's definitely, it was a good adaptation, and it was matching the world to what ours is, which again, I think was a big part of this, was to establish a real world where, it's familiar to us as much as possible. And right now, young tech billionaires are extremely familiar. I also like the fact that they sort of much more strongly emphasize the fact that he's sort of like an abused victim from his father. Like, there's a lot more of a pattern of abuse in his history than you ever really see being established in animated or comic book or any other iteration at all.
Yeah, I loved his dialogue. I loved his cadence. I loved his delivery. Like, just his, like, he doesn't have any other powers except for his intellectual prowess, right? Like, that's That's his superpower, is his intellectual bandwidth. That's what it is. So he uses wordplay, and he uses he uses his intellect to intimidate and to overshadow people and to make people feel like they're less than him, right? He does that all the time. And I love the way that some of these scenes play out, like especially the one with the senator, when he has the gall to push that Jolly Rancher candy into his mouth. That's fucking hilarious, man. Like that, like so you don't get more maniacal than that. Like you just put your hands on a US senator and you push the candy into his mouth. Like he doesn't get more crossing the zone of intimacy or personal space than something like that. And he just met the fucking guy. Like it was just beautiful. Very well done. And let's talk about his plan. Let's talk about this scheme that he starts from minute one all the way up to the end. Like he basically is putting Superman and Batman on a collision course. Every little step that he takes moves them closer to each other for this final showdown, right? So
yeah, and they make him appear like it's cool because they put the plan in the point of view of Batman and Superman, where it's not super known what's going on yet. He appears at certain times.
Yes.
Only throughout the movie do you start getting the clue that like he's involved in certain events and matters, and only when he meets Superman does he really reveal the full plan, and you kind of get to see it like the heroes are seeing it, which is a cool way to go instead of sort of just being behind the head of Lex Luthor and just knowing the whole plan from the start of the movie.
Yeah. So, okay, how many times did you have to watch the extended cut to see the entire extent of the plan, to see all the little intricacies and granular elements of that? Like, how many times did you have to watch it?
Oh yeah, you need a few watches for sure. First of all, the length of the movie alone, obviously it just has a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of dimension to the movie. So it really also depends on what you're focusing on each time you watch it. I think to really get the breadth of the plan, you actually have to be watching it with the goal of seeing all the pieces of the plan. Because if you're trying to, accomplish a different goal, like you're trying to analyze the movie for something else, you'll probably miss things. So like you need at least, if you're not going to watch it multiple times, you need one watch with that on your mind.
Okay. What do you think the most easiest granular element is to kind of overlook in terms of this plan? Which one would you pick?
Well, like the desert scene, a lot of what's going on there is a bit of a haze at first when you're watching it without any real, idea. It's much easier to kind of go back and watch it when you already know that all this was Lex Luthor's plan. But if you're watching it for the first time, that scene is quite a haze. Like it makes it pretty easy to miss that he's behind a lot of that.
Okay, I think it's people maybe overlooking the fact that Lex Luthor is paying guys in prison to shank people with the Bat brand.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah, definitely.
Did you pick up on that one?
Yeah, but no, it's definitely something that would easily pass you by. I mean, it's only like one scene plus another mention in another scene, so it's definitely not an easy one to pick up on.
Yeah, and then like, okay, one of the things I loved about this movie, and this falls right into what we're talking about, is the way that okay, you know what? We're doing character studies. I think we should do a character study on this because it actually is a character within this movie, and that's the media. Well, I'm not just talking about the newspaper reporters like Lois Lane. I'm talking about the media as a whole, as a device, as an entity, is a huge element in the story. The media is the one that's picking up the stories about the Bat branding and the deaths in the prisons, and obviously what happened in the desert, and the senators trying to use their bureaucratic power to control Superman, and all these little elements are being publicized by the media. And we're seeing, one, how Bruce Wayne interprets what he's getting from the media. And we see, two, how Clark Kent is interpreting things that he's getting from the media. And they're both seeing it from a very different perspective. They both kind of feel like, well, obviously Superman is more on the moral high ground than Batman is at this point, because Batman has kind of lost his sense of direction and is basically out there branding and, really, really exacting some physical punishment on the people he's coming up against, these street level drug dealers, skin peddlers, whatever you want to call them. He's not really the Batman, the respected Batman that we know and that we identify with, right? He's kind of he's kind of fallen down a bit.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the media is, it's probably one of the most involved aspects of the entire movie because it has so many things that it's doing and contributing to the whole storyline. It's essentially the chronicler of the entire movie. It's the focal point of all the themes and everything that's trying to be established. It's essentially doing like the storytelling on a much more granular level, even on the surface too. It does a lot of storytelling, like you were saying, with the events that are going on and, you know, what it's being reporting and stuff. So essentially, like, Snyder uses the news and the media to essentially tell the entire story and to establish themes and symbols throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm impressed that Zack Snyder had the foresight to give us this tool to kind of examine the characters through these lenses, because Marvel has their own gods, right? They have two already that have emerged onto the scene. And have we ever seen the media try and cover the public reaction to Thor as a real person, or that Loki is a real tangible element within the universe? Like, we never got to see anything like that, right? No. But this is what I like about Zack Snyder's work, is that he puts it into the context of the real world. Like, how would the real world react to this? If Superman emerged on the scene, this is exactly what would happen. We would have everybody trying to figure out what it meant for humanity on a larger scale, and obviously what it meant in terms of the universal grander scheme, you know? And I love that this is something that he focused a lot of attention on, using this as a tool to create this narrative. Were you a fan of this part? Like, were you a fan of this? The way that he did this?
I mean, I think it was on many parts vital too, because if you're going to put such an emphasis on making the world a real place that people right now can relate to and feel like they're in, then media is an integral part of that, because you can't expect these events to happen without media covering it. So I think it was a really cool Swiss Army knife for Snyder to be able to use on so many levels, and it's even on the most basic level. It's really important because, I mean, you can't expect the media not to know or cover any of these things that are happening, especially when you're introducing godlike figures to the world. So I think it's a super important thing, and something that Marvel will overlook because, like I mentioned in the beginning, they're not trying to create a real world. They're trying to both make unrealistic character and world. So that's in that universe. It's not really a problem, like it's. The whole thing is adapting to the hero, so it doesn't really matter. But in Batman v Superman, it's different because you're taking two extremities. You're taking unrealistic characters with an extremely realistic world. So the media, they're the storytellers of the world. And this is, assumingly the most important event in human history. So.
Well, guys, I think that's all we have for this episode, but we will come back and finish this off. I'll bring Eran back and we will continue our conversation about Batman v Superman. We'll go into a little bit more about some of our favorite scenes. Definitely want to talk about some of the visual choices that Zack Snyder made in terms of the cyclical style of storytelling. I definitely want to talk about the Batman warehouse scene, the funeral scene, and the final battle. The nightmare scene, Flash, the metahumans. Now, before we leave you, before we sign off, I've got two asks. One, if you could head over to Podchaser or Stitcher or Apple Podcasts and drop us a review, we would really appreciate it. And we would love an honest review. We would love any feedback on how we can make the show better. We thrive on constructive criticism. So if there's anything that we can do to improve the show, we would love to hear about it. The second ask is, if you know anybody who enjoys this type of content, that shares your passion for anime and for comic books and sci-fi and fantasy and film and TV, tell them about our show. Maybe even go one step further and send them a link to our show. If you guys could do that for us, we would really, really appreciate it. So with all that said, I'm going to sign off here. I've been Frank Maguire.
And I'm Eran Dahan.
Thanks, guys, for joining us, and we'll catch you back on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Peace.